Things are starting to get really interesting right now because we're entering that part of the offseason where every roster spot matters. The headlines might not be flying around every day, but behind the scenes, some huge battles are about to take place. There are players fighting to prove they belong, young talent trying to make a name for themselves, and veterans who can't afford to take anything for granted. The competition is heating up, and the next few weeks could completely change the outlook for several players on this team. Before we get into all the details, make sure to smash that like button and drop "Go Hawks" in the comments if you're a real Seahawks fan and you're riding with this team all the way through training camp. A fascinating discussion is starting to take shape around the Seattle Seahawks as the organization moves through the quiet stretch between minicamp and the beginning of training camp. While much of the off-season conversation has focused on trades and outside additions, attention is now shifting toward a different reality. Not everyone currently on the roster will survive the final cut-down process. With the competition expected to intensify once training camp begins, several players find themselves in situations where every practice rep and every preseason snap could determine their future with the team. One of the first names drawing attention is Cody White. After surprising many observers by making the roster previously, White managed to contribute when opportunities came his way. His value was not limited to catching passes. Special teams work played a major role in helping him earn a spot. The challenge now is that the Seahawks receiver room appears crowded. There are multiple younger players competing for opportunities, and the organization may ultimately decide that developmental upside is more valuable when difficult roster decisions arrive. With Seattle potentially keeping only 5 or 6 receivers, White faces a difficult path toward securing a place on the final roster. Another intriguing name mentioned is quarterback Jalen Milroe. While the possibility of him being released appears unlikely, there are still important factors worth monitoring. Reports from off-season activities suggested he did not have a flawless stretch during OTAs and minicamp, including some issues with accuracy and a few interceptions. At the same time, there is significant context attached to those observations. The Seahawks possess a defense that has reportedly performed at a very high level during these practices, and defensive units often develop chemistry faster than offenses during the spring period. More importantly, there are already offensive packages being developed to highlight Milroe's specific skill set. That suggests Seattle sees value in what he can bring to the offense and views him as part of future plans, rather than simply another camp arm competing for survival. The running back position also presents difficult questions. Kenny McIntosh remains a player many fans appreciate, but circumstances may not be working in his favor. After missing the 2025 season because of a torn ACL, he now returns to a backfield that appears loaded with competition. Several names are already viewed as strong roster candidates, creating a crowded environment where opportunities become limited. McIntosh's challenge is not necessarily about talent alone. It is about finding room in a position group that currently appears deeper than ever. Training camp could become the most important stretch of his professional career. On the offensive line, Christian Haynes stands out as a player facing serious pressure. Expectations were once much higher. There was legitimate belief that he could become a major piece of Seattle's plans in the interior offensive line rotation. Instead, the conversation has shifted toward whether the team may decide to move in another direction altogether. The Seahawks have invested in young offensive linemen, and if the coaching staff believes those players offer greater long-term potential, Haynes could find himself losing ground in one of the most competitive position battles on the roster. Josh Jones presents a completely different storyline. Unlike some of the younger players trying to establish themselves, Jones already demonstrated his value when called upon previously. However, his absence during portions of off-season activities raised questions. Observations regarding the tone of comments coming from head coach Mike Macdonald created speculation that there may be frustration regarding Jones's current situation. Availability matters, especially when roster spots are being evaluated. Even players with proven experience cannot assume their place is secure if they are unable to participate consistently. The coming weeks could be critical for Jones as he works to reinforce his importance to the team. Perhaps one of the most interesting developmental stories involves Jared Ivey. Seattle is reportedly transitioning him from an edge role toward a position that places him closer to the defensive line. The move could create opportunities, particularly because he would be learning behind established talent. Previous flashes, including a strong preseason performance, showed why the organization was determined to keep him around rather than risk losing him. But development projects come with expectation. Coaches want visible growth, improved technique, and evidence that a player can handle expanded responsibilities. If those signs do not appear during camp and preseason action, difficult conversations could follow. The secondary may contain some of the fiercest battles on the entire roster. Nehemiah Pritchett enters an off-season described as extremely important for his future. Competition at cornerback is intense, and younger players are pushing for opportunities. What makes Pritchett's situation particularly noteworthy is that special teams contributions have helped him remain relevant. Eventually, however, players must establish themselves at their primary position. The pressure is increasing because the organization cannot rely indefinitely on potential alone. At some point, production becomes the deciding factor. Another name generating discussion is Noah Igbinoghene. Despite having NFL experience and reportedly producing positive moments during off-season practices, including a notable interception return for a touchdown, he still finds himself competing in a crowded defensive back room. Seattle has several younger players fighting for roster spots, and youth often becomes a powerful factor when teams evaluate long-term value. Strong practices help, but the battle is far from over. As training camp approaches, the overall theme becomes clear. These discussions are not predictions that specific players will definitely be released. Instead, they highlight how competitive the Seahawks roster has become. Veterans, developmental prospects, special teams contributors, and former fan favorites all face varying degrees of uncertainty. Every position group appears to have players fighting not only for playing time, but potentially for their jobs. That reality transforms training camp into one of the most important evaluation periods of the year, where a strong week can change a career trajectory and a disappointing stretch can dramatically alter a player's future. With names like Cody White, Kenny McIntosh, Christian Haynes, Josh Jones, Jared Ivey, Nehemiah Pritchett, Noah Igbinoghene, Chaz Surratt, Jake Bobo, and even the unlikely inclusion of Jalen Milroe entering the conversation, the Seahawks appear headed toward several difficult decisions before the final 53 race is announced. The competition is real, the margin for error is shrinking, and every player mentioned will have a major opportunity to change the narrative once training camp begins. One player who cannot be overlooked in this conversation is Chaz Surratt. His path to a roster spot has largely been tied to special teams contributions, and that reality creates both an opportunity and a challenge. The Seahawks already appear to have a defined group at inside linebacker, with Tyrese Knight, Ernest Jones, and Drake Thomas occupying the spotlight in that room. When a team has a clear top group, the remaining roster spots become difficult to secure. That means Surratt must convince the coaching staff that his impact on special teams is valuable enough to justify keeping him over younger or faster alternatives. In a roster battle where versatility matters, every snap during training camp and preseason action will be under the microscope. Then there is one of the most interesting names on the entire list, Jake Bobo. Few players generate as much positive reaction from fans whenever roster discussions begin. Bobo has earned a reputation as a reliable target with strong hands and a larger frame that can be useful in scoring situations. However, roster construction is rarely based on popularity. It is based on fit, role, and depth. The challenge for Bobo comes from the evolution of other positions within the offense. If Elijah Arroyo continues to develop into the player Seattle believes he can become, and if A.J. Barner keeps progressing at tight end, the Seahawks could find themselves with multiple larger receiving options capable of filling important red zone responsibilities. That does not automatically place Bobo in danger, but it does create additional competition for the specific role he brings to the offense. The fact that Seattle previously showed interest in keeping him around suggests the organization values him, yet no player can afford to become comfortable when roster spots are being evaluated. What makes all of these situations fascinating is that the Seahawks are not dealing with obvious roster casualties. Many of the names being discussed have legitimate arguments for remaining with the team. Some have produced in games. Others have impressed during practices. Several possess developmental upside that organizations often hesitate to give up on too quickly. That is why training camp could become the ultimate deciding factor. For players like Cody White, the challenge is proving they deserve one of the limited spots available in a crowded position group. For Kenny McIntosh, it is showing he can overcome the circumstances created by a deep-running back room. For Christian Haynes, it is convincing decision-makers that he can still become part of the offensive line's future. For Josh Jones, availability and consistency may be the biggest factors. For Jared Ivey, the focus will be on demonstrating growth in a new role. For Nehemiah Pritchett and Noah Igbinoghene, every rep in the secondary carries added importance because of how competitive that room has become. And for Chaz Surratt and Jake Bobo, special teams value and offensive fit could determine whether they survive the final roster cuts. The most important takeaway is that these discussions are centered on possibilities, not guarantees. Training camp has a way of completely changing perceptions. A player who enters camp viewed as being on the roster bubble can quickly become a lock with a strong preseason. Likewise, someone considered safe can suddenly find himself fighting for a job if younger players outperform expectations. That uncertainty is exactly what makes this stage of the offseason so compelling. As Seattle moves closer to training camp, all eyes will be on these position battles. Every practice report, every preseason performance, and every evaluation from the coaching staff will provide clues about where the roster is heading. The competition appears fierce across multiple position groups, and that is ultimately a positive sign for the organization because it means jobs must be earned rather than handed out. The next several weeks could determine the future of multiple players currently wearing Seahawks uniforms. Some will strengthen their case and secure a role on the final roster. Others may find themselves on the outside looking in despite previous contributions. That is the reality of NFL roster construction, and Seattle appears headed toward several difficult decisions before the regular season arrives. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like on the video, and turn on notifications so you never miss any Seahawks news. And when you're done, click the video appearing on your screen right now for more Seattle Seahawks coverage. The latest updates and developments are waiting for you there, and you will find the newest Seahawks stories first right here.